Look, it's timely now that we hear from Professor Tommy Wiedmann from the University of New South Wales. Tommy is Professor of Sustainability Research at the University of New South Wales. He is New South Wales Circular's academic advisor and a researcher and contributor to the newly released Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, IPCC report. Tommy will take us through the latest climate science, the increasing urgency for action. He will also discuss the essential role circular economy has in both cutting emissions, carbon emissions, protecting biodiversity and building a resilient economy. Over to you, Tommy.
Thank you, Lisa. Good morning, everyone. Thank you for this introduction, Minister. And thanks to New South Wales Circular for the invitation to speak at this forum. I will just give a brief overview, as you said, Lisa, on how the science of climate change and circular economy relate to each other, and how a circular economy can help to mitigate climate change. So first, let's see what the science says on climate change. As you know, the IPCC is currently in the process of publishing its 6th assessment report. The first 2 parts have already been published. And the report from Working Group 3 on mitigation will be released in 2 weeks' time from today, that is, on April the 4th, Monday. These latest reports from the IPCC are much more assertive in their language than previous reports. It's unequivocal that human influence is causing climate change. The recent changes in extreme weather events are unprecedented, as we know all too well. About 40% of the human population in every region across the globe is highly vulnerable to climate impacts. So in a nutshell, we can say the impacts of climate change are here now, and they are worse than we thought previously. The third report that will come out in 2 weeks will confirm the urgency required in climate action again. We are not on track, unfortunately, to achieve the aims of the Paris Agreement. The greenhouse gas emissions have been rising again last year. Yes, there was a dip in emissions of about 7% because of COVID, but we are right back up there again. Last year in 2021, they were up where we were in 2019. The current pledges made at COP26 are good, of course, but they're not sufficient. They will still lead to a warming well above 2 degrees Celsius. And this also means that just aiming for net zero by 2050 on its own is not sufficient. Rapid and significant reductions in emissions need to be achieved earlier, by 2030 already. All of this leads the IPCC to say that transformational change is needed, practically in every sector. Incremental change is just not sufficient, and that, exactly that, applies to the circular economy as well. So, speaking about circular economy, what can it do? The good news here is that a circular economy can help with mitigation in practically every sector, across the board, really. There are large unexploited opportunities to reduce emissions, and we can tap into that, if we get it right, that is. A recent report estimated that circular economy interventions between now and 2050 could save us between 5 and 11 years of current global emission. This will buy us crucial time. At current emission rates, we only have about 8 years worth of carbon budget left before we hit 1.5 degrees of warming. So getting another 5 to 11 years on top of that is very precious indeed. And what are the opportunities for circular economy to reduce emissions? One crucial sector is industry and manufacturing, which makes up around 1/3 of global greenhouse gas emissions. If indirect emissions from electricity are added, then it actually is the highest emitting sector. And it has the highest potential for circular economy through closing material loops, zero carbon feedstocks, so for example, green hydrogen for steel production, and improved material substitution with bio-based products. This can, in some cases, save over 90% of emissions. And for products, as it was mentioned already, strategies like upgrading, sharing, reusing, repairing, and remanufacturing show mitigation potentials of 50 to 70%. In the built environment and construction sector, there is potential to save 60 to 90% of emissions by prolonging the lifetimes of buildings and infrastructure. by reusing building materials and whole structures. That really stands out as a most promising alternative. But for this to happen, we need to change construction methods, building codes. We even need to change patterns of urbanization and infrastructure development. And we need to rethink the use of space in buildings. So it's quite profound. In transport, we can save up to 70% of emissions with fuel alternatives, active transport, and by reusing and sharing cars instead of owning them. Perhaps surprisingly, mitigation potentials in the waste sector are more limited because once a material enters the waste stage, it's basically too late. You need much more energy to bring it back into use. So that reminds us that the focus of a circular economy should not be on recycling alone. And it should not be on technology alone either. We need technology, of course, but it must be transformational, not end of pipe. So for example, it has to be green hydrogen from renewables rather than coal with carbon capture and storage. We really need to make that step. But in addition to transformational technology, we also need to reduce our consumption. Avoiding waste in the first place must be a priority. And that also includes the waste of energy. I think the real focus of a circular economy must be on the economy part. We need to design an economy that is that is not dependent on GDP growth and on ever-rising resource consumption. Because there is no way we can recycle ourselves out of growth. If we want the circular economy to succeed, then the linear economy must be scaled back at the same time. The aim must be an overall absolute reduction of material extraction and use. And that is why new business models, policies, and regulation are so important to support this. So I'm sure today and tomorrow will be filled with lots of ideas and good discussions around these points. And I'm looking forward to the remainder of this forum. And once again, thank you very much for inviting me and for listening. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Tommy. Please thank me please join me rather in thanking Tommy Wiedmann. It's a very confronting reality facing our way of life, isn't it? Tommy's given us an insight into the 6th assessment report that incremental change is no longer acceptable. We need urgent action and now. And we know that circular economy can tackle almost half those emissions, as Tommy has mentioned, those emissions that are embedded in products and food.